The USS Vengeance was the biggest ship humanity had ever built, and it floated in space like a giant metal mountain that stretched 3 kilometers from one end to the other, and Captain Daniel Brooks stood on the bridge with his hands behind his back while he looked at the screens showing enemy positions because 50 years of humans spreading across the stars had brought them to this exact moment where everything would be decided. Lieutenant Nicole Harris walked over from the communications area, and her face showed she was worried because she had worked with Brooks for 7 years and he could always tell what she was thinking just by looking at her. And right now she was thinking about the message that just came in from the enemy fleet. She told the captain that the Zarkonian fleet was sending them a message and they wanted the Vengeance to surrender immediately. And Brooks smiled just a little bit because the Zarkonians had been attacking the outer colonies for 3 years now, and their technology was so much better than anything humans had that it seemed impossible to fight them. And they could move between stars without the big clumsy jump drives that human ships needed, and they hit fast and left nothing behind, except ash and burned planets. Brooks spoke quietly and told Harris to send a message back to the Zarkonians, saying that humanity does not surrender and never will, and Harris nodded and went back to send the message while Commander Jake Morrison checked the tactical screens and counted how many enemy ships were coming at them. Morrison told the captain that the enemy had 6 massive capital ships and at least 40 smaller support vessels, and the Vengeance shields could maybe handle 1/4 of that firepower if they were lucky, and Brooks listened and said they would have to make every shot count because there was no other choice. The crew had practiced this battle 1,000 times in simulations, and the Vengeance carried the most advanced weapons that human scientists could build, including experimental quantum torpedoes that might be able to punch through Zarkonian shields, but nobody really knew if they would work, because they had never been tested in real combat. Lieutenant Kyle Chen sat at the helm and called out coordinates as the Zarkonian fleet got closer, and their ships glowed with a strange purple light that came from the crystal cores that powered them, and those same crystals made their ships almost impossible to destroy with regular weapons. Brooks ordered the shields raised to maximum power and told Morrison to charge all weapons and target the enemy flagship, because if they could take out the leader, maybe the rest would fall back. But that was probably just wishful thinking. The bridge hummed with energy as everyone got ready for battle, and every single person on the Vengeance knew what was at stake, because if they failed here, then the Zarkonians would have a clear path straight to Earth, and 300 billion people were depending on the 2,000 crew members of this one ship. Morrison announced that weapons range would be reached in 10 seconds, and Brooks took a deep breath and opened a channel to speak to everyone on the ship, and he told them that today they would show these invaders what humanity was made of, and today they would prove that humans do not go quietly into the night. And he ordered everyone to battle stations. The Zarkonian flagship fired first and sent a beam of concentrated energy through space that turned the darkness into a tunnel of pure light, and the Vengeance shields flared up and absorbed the hit, but the force of it shook the entire ship and made everything rattle. Brooks shouted to return fire, and the quantum torpedoes launched in perfect sequence with their warheads glowing like miniature stars, and they streaked across the gap between the two fleets, and for just a moment, Brooks let himself hope that maybe this would work. The torpedoes hit the Zarkonian flagship shields and exploded in a massive burst of energy that would have completely vaporized any human ship. But when the light faded, the flagship was still there, and its shields had barely even flickered. Morrison reported direct hit but minimal damage, and his voice sounded empty and hollow, because he could not believe what he was seeing, and none of them could believe it. The Zarkonians responded instantly, and all 6 capital ships opened fire at the same time, and the Vengeance shields held for exactly 4 seconds before they collapsed completely, and the first beam punched through the forward section and vaporized the main weapons array, and the second beam destroyed the engine room, and the third, fourth, and fifth beams tore through the hull like it was made of paper. Brooks grabbed his command chair as the ship died around him, and emergency lights came on and turned everything red, and the tactical displays went dark, and life support failed. On 8 different decks, he ordered everyone to evacuate the ship, but even as he said it, he knew they were too late because the escape pods had been among the first systems to get destroyed. Harris looked up from her console with blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead, and told the captain that the Zarkonians were sending another message, and Brooks told her to put it on screen. The Zarkonian commander appeared, and its body was made of crystal that bent light in strange ways. And when it spoke, the voice had harmonics that hurt human ears, and it said that human resistance was admirable but completely useless, and they would remember humanity as they wiped out every human world. The message ended, and the final attack began, and the USS Vengeance broke apart under the sustained bombardment, and Captain Daniel Brooks died at his post, along with every single member of his crew. And the Zarkonian fleet did not even slow down as they set their course toward the inner colonies, where millions more humans were waiting. The news arrived at Earth 17 hours later because the quantum communication network could send messages faster than light, and Admiral Lisa Campbell got the report while sitting in her office at Unified Earth Command, and for the first time, in her 40 years as a soldier, she felt real despair creeping into her heart. She asked how many people survived even though she already knew what the answer would be, and Colonel Frank Peterson stood there with his face pale and told her that there were no survivors at all, and the Vengeance had been destroyed with everyone on board, and that meant 2,000 people were dead. Campbell closed her eyes because Daniel Brooks had been her friend and one of the best officers she had ever known, and now he was gone along with his entire crew, and she asked Peterson about the Zarkonian fleet position. Peterson said quietly that they had already reached Tau Ceti colony, and early reports suggested the Zarkonians were using some kind of orbital weapon that was setting the entire planet on fire. Tau Ceti had been the first successful colony outside the solar system, and 8 million people lived there in cities that looked almost like Earth cities with farmers and scientists, and children playing in streets, and now all of it was burning. Campbell asked about evacuation, but Peterson shook his head and said the Zarkonians did not give them any time because the bombardment started the moment they arrived in orbit, and estimates suggested the entire atmosphere would catch fire within 6 hours, and within 12 hours the surface would be melted. Glass. Campbell pulled up a holographic map that showed all of human space with 12 colonies and 300 outposts, and Earth sitting in the center of it all, and the Zarkonian fleet was cutting a straight path through everything, heading right for the homeworld. She demanded to know what forces they had left, and what ships or weapons could slow down the enemy advance. And Peterson pulled up tactical data showing that the Second Fleet was holding position at Proxima Centauri, with 15 cruisers and 30 destroyers, and maybe 100 support vessels. And that was everything they had that was not already defending Earth. Campbell said it out loud that they would be sending those ships against 6 Zarkonian capital ships, and the enemy had destroyed the Vengeance in minutes. So what chance did the Second Fleet possibly have? Peterson admitted they had no chance at all, but maybe they could buy some time, and time meant evacuations, and time meant preparing Earth defenses, and time meant finding something that could actually hurt these invaders. Campbell stared at the map for a long time because every ship she sent against the Zarkonians was a death sentence for the crew, but every day the enemy moved forward, they turned another world into a dead wasteland. She finally told Peterson to send the order, and the Second Fleet should engage the Zarkonian advance with full combat protocols. And Peterson hesitated because those crews had families, and everyone knew this was a suicide mission. Campbell replied coldly that the 8 million people dying on Tau Ceti right now also had families, and the 300 billion people on Earth who would die if they did not stop these monsters also had families, and she told Peterson to send the order. After Peterson left to carry out the command, Campbell turned to the window that looked out over Earth Command headquarters and watched the sun setting in shades of orange and red that reminded her too much of burning worlds. She thought about the Vengeance and Captain Brooks and his crew, because they had been the best humanity had, and they were equipped with the most advanced weapons human science could produce, but the Zarkonians had swatted them aside like they were nothing. What hope did humanity have against an enemy so much more advanced that even the best human efforts were just a minor inconvenience to them? The communication system chimed with another report from Tau Ceti, and Campbell forced herself to read every terrible detail, because the Zarkonians were not just bombing the colony from orbit, but being very methodical about it and making sure nothing survived. They were destroying cities and farmland and oceans, and even the bedrock itself was being systematically erased. And by the time the report ended, Tau Ceti was gone. And not just the colony, but the entire biosphere was dead. 8 million people had been reduced to atoms, and decades of terraforming had been erased, and the planet itself was now a lifeless cinder that would stay uninhabitable for thousands of years. The Zarkonian fleet was, already moving toward the next target, and Campbell sat down at her desk and started writing evacuation orders for the remaining colonies because it felt like surrender. But what choice did she have when every battle was a massacre, and every engagement ended the same way humanity's greatest battleship had been destroyed without any mercy? And now, world by world, the Zarkonians were turning every human planet into a wasteland, and there seemed to be nothing anyone could do to stop them. The Second Fleet died exactly the way Admiral Campbell predicted it would, and Captain Victoria Grant commanded the cruiser USS Defiance, and watched helplessly as the Zarkonian capital ships tore through her formation like wolves attacking sheep, and the entire battle lasted only 11 minutes. She ordered everyone to abandon ship when the main reactor started going critical, but the escape pods never had a chance because the Zarkonians targeted them deliberately and vaporized each small craft as it launched, and there was no mercy and no prisoners, just complete extermination. Grant died at the helm of her ship with her hands still locked on the controls as she tried one last desperate ramming attack, and the Defiance struck the Zarkonian flagship shields at full speed and disintegrated on impact, and the shields did not even flicker. 15,000 people died with the Second Fleet, and the Zarkonian fleet suffered 0 casualties and continued on their path toward Earth. With barely a pause on Proxima Centauri, the evacuation was already happening when the Zarkonian fleet arrived, and Governor Stephen Martinez stood in the spaceport control tower coordinating the desperate escape, as every transport ship in the system was being used to ferry as many people as possible to the jump stations. He asked his aide, Lieutenant Nathan Cross, how many people were still on the surface, and Cross replied with emotion in his voice that 2 million were still down there and they would never get them all out in time. Martinez looked through the tower windows at the city below where New Harmony had been built over 30 years, and it was a beautiful metropolis of 5 million people, and now it was being abandoned, and 2 million of those people would never escape. The first Zarkonian bombardment beam hit the northern continent, and Martinez watched through sensors as an entire landmass simply stopped existing and was vaporized instantly, and the shockwave went around the planet, triggering earthquakes and tsunamis that would have killed millions, even if the attack had stopped there. But the Zarkonians did not stop, and beam after beam rained down from orbit, and oceans boiled, and the atmosphere caught fire, and Martinez kept coordinating evacuations even as the world burned around him, and he sent every transport he could toward safety, until a bombardment beam struck the spaceport itself. Governor Stephen Martinez and Lieutenant Nathan Cross were among the 2 million who died that day, and within 6 hours, Proxima Centauri joined Tau Ceti as another dead world, and another example of Zarkonian efficiency back on Earth. Admiral Campbell stood before the Unified Earth Council, which was the civilian government that normally controlled the military. But these were desperate times, and she had been given emergency powers that made her, basically, a military dictator. She told the council members that the situation was simple, and they had 3 choices, which were to evacuate Earth and flee deeper into space, hoping to find somewhere the Zarkonians would not follow, or they could surrender and pray for mercy, or they could fight. Council Chairman Gregory Walsh leaned forward and said that she had just described how every military force sent against these invaders had been destroyed, and the vengeance lasted only minutes, and the entire Second Fleet lasted 11 minutes. So what made her think they could fight effectively? Campbell admitted. She did not think conventional warfare would work at all. But she had scientists at Research Station 7 who had been studying every piece of data from their battles, and they thought they had found something important. She pulled up a holographic display showing the crystal structure of Zarkonian technology, and explained that their ships were powered by quantum-locked crystal matrices, and that was what made them nearly invulnerable. But there was a theoretical weakness: if they could destabilize the quantum lock, then the entire crystal matrix would cascade and their ships would tear themselves apart from the inside. Walsh repeated the word theoretical and asked if they even had a weapon that could do this, and Campbell said they would have. One, because Research Station 7 was developing a quantum resonance bomb that had never been tested, and the math suggested they would only get one shot. But if it worked, they could destroy the entire Zarkonian fleet in one strike. Another council member named Patricia Morgan asked what would happen if the bomb failed, and Campbell looked at her and said, then Earth dies like Tau Ceti and Proxima Centauri, and humanity gets exterminated. but at least they would go down fighting. The vote was unanimous and Earth would make its stand. Raymond Hughes had not slept in 48 hours, and as the lead physicist at Research Station 7, he had been given one impossible task to finish on an impossible timeline, which was to build a weapon that could destabilize quantum-locked crystal matrices and test it and deploy it and save humanity. His team had 6 other scientists who were all among the smartest people humanity had produced, and Karen Wright handled the quantum mechanics while Alan Foster worked on the delivery system, and Claire Thompson managed the computing power needed to model their theories. They had 5 days before the Zarkonian fleet reached Earth, which meant 5 days to do the impossible. Wright said during one of their endless planning sessions that the math worked and in theory a properly tuned quantum resonance pulse should destabilize the crystal matrices, but the resonance frequency had to be exact, and they were talking about precision. Down to the femtosecond, Hughes asked if they could achieve that precision, and Foster pulled up designs on the holographic display and explained he had created a delivery system based on modified quantum torpedoes where they would load the resonance bomb into a torpedo casing and program the detonation sequence and fire it at the Zarkonian flagship, and the bomb would detonate at the right range and broadcast the resonance pulse. Hughes asked about the effective range, and Foster admitted it was about 500 kilometers because any further and the pulse would lose coherence and any closer. And they risked the delivery ship being caught in the cascade effect. Thompson, who had been running simulations, looked up with a serious expression and said there was another problem, because the resonance pulse required massive amounts of power, and they were talking about channeling energy equal to a small star into a focused beam, lasting less than a microsecond. Hughes asked about using the station fusion reactors as a power source, but Thompson said they were not even close to powerful enough and they would need something orders of magnitude stronger. Like the core of a jump drive. Foster's eyes went wide, and he said she wanted to use a jump drive core as a battery, and that was completely insane because those things were barely stable under normal conditions, and trying to channel that much energy through their bomb could cause it to explode. Early Hughes asked quietly if they had another option, and the silence that followed was answer enough. They worked without stopping for the next 3 days, and the quantum resonance bomb took shape in the main fabrication bay, and it looked like a sphere made of strange materials and quantum processors that seemed like something from a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Captain Henry Cole arrived at the station on day 4, and he commanded the USS Marathon, which was one of the few remaining military ships in Earth Orbital Defense Fleet, and he had volunteered to be the delivery pilot. Cole looked at the bomb carefully and said, "1 shot and 1 chance to save humanity and no pressure, right?" And Hughes appreciated the dark humor. Hughes explained that the bomb was as ready as they could make it, and the resonance frequency was locked in, and the jump drive core was set up to provide the necessary power. And all Cole needed to do was get within 500 kilometers of the Zarkonian flagship and fire, Cole said, and hope to be fast enough to get clear before the cascade starts. And Wright spoke quietly and said that their model suggested the cascade would move faster than light, and once it began there would be no way to outrun it. Cole absorbed this information without showing fear and said, "So it was a suicide mission." And Hughes said firmly that it was not suicide but a sacrifice. And there was a big difference. On day 5, the Zarkonian fleet entered the Sol system, and Admiral Campbell watched their approach from Earth Command with her strategic display showing 6 massive capital ships and their support vessels moving steadily toward humanity homeworld. She asked about the weapon status, and Colonel Peterson reported that it was loaded aboard the Marathon, and Captain Cole was ready to launch on her command. Campbell opened a communication channel to the Marathon, and Cole's face appeared on her display, looking calm and determined, and she asked if he understood the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. Cole replied, yes, and said, if this worked, they would save Earth and everyone on it, and if it failed, they would be no worse off than they already were. Campbell said softly, "Good hunting, Captain," and the Marathon launched from Earth orbit and accelerated toward the incoming Zarkonian fleet, and Cole knew he had no chance of approaching without being detected, because the enemy would see him coming, and they would fire on him, and he had to survive long enough to get within range and release the weapon. 1 shot and 1 chance in the fate of humanity riding on his shoulders. The Marathon moved through space as a single human ship against an alien armada, and Captain Henry Cole sat alone in the cockpit, with his hand steady on the controls, even though he knew he was flying toward his death. The Zarkonians detected him at 800 kilometers, and their flagship turned its weapons toward the approaching ship, and Cole knew what was coming, because he had watched the recordings of how the Vengeance was destroyed and how the Second Fleet was massacred, and he knew exactly how this would end if he failed. The first energy beam shot through space, and Cole threw the Marathon into a desperate evasive move, and the beam missed by less than 50 meters, and the second beam clipped his port thruster, sending the ship into a tumbling spin. He muttered, "Come on," as he fought to regain control, and the Marathon responded slowly because it was damaged but still working, and he was now 600 kilometers from target. Another barrage came, and this time Cole anticipated it and juked left, then dove down using every trick he had learned in 20 years of combat flying. And the Marathon shuddered from near misses, but he kept her flying 500 kilometers, and Cole armed the quantum resonance bomb and felt its power humming through the ship systems, and the jump drive core that powered it was barely contained, and its energy signature made the Marathon light up like a star on every Zarkonian sensor. The enemy concentrated their fire, and 4 capital ships turned their weapons on the approaching human vessel, and Cole pushed the Marathon to her limits, but still the beams found their mark, and his shields collapsed, and his hull plating began to melt, and alarms screamed as system after system failed. But he was close enough now at exactly 500 kilometers, and Cole whispered for humanity and fired. The quantum resonance bomb launched from the Marathon torpedo tube as a sphere of hope, and it accelerated toward the Zarkonian flagship, and for 3 eternal seconds nothing happened. Then the bomb detonated, and the explosion was silent in the vacuum of space. But its effects were devastating as a wave of quantum resonance energy expanded from the detonation point, invisible to eyes but deadly to crystal technology. The Zarkonian flagship shields collapsed first, and then its crystal matrix core began to vibrate at frequencies that defied physics, and the vibration spread like a cascade of quantum instability that tore through the alien vessel fundamental structure. The flagship came apart in silence, with its crystal hull shattering into billions of fragments. But the cascade did not stop, and it jumped to the next capital ship, and then the next, spreading through the Zarkonian fleet like wildfire through dry grass. Captain Henry Cole had just enough time to see his weapon work before a stray energy beam from a dying Zarkonian ship struck the Marathon, and he died instantly with his sacrifice complete. On Earth, Admiral Campbell watched the sensor readings with disbelief, as one by one the Zarkonian vessels broke apart, and the entire fleet, with 6 capital ships and 40 support vessels, all of them were tearing themselves to pieces as their crystal cores cascaded into quantum chaos. Colonel Peterson said quietly that it worked. And by God, it actually worked. The last Zarkonian ship fell apart 14 seconds after the bomb detonated, and the threat that had seemed unstoppable, and the enemy that had destroyed humanity, greatest battleship without mercy and turned 2 colonies into wastelands, was gone. But the cost had been terrible, with the USS Vengeance and its 2,000 crew members, and the Second Fleet with 15,000 personnel, and 8 million colonists on Tau Ceti, and 5 million on Proxima Centauri, and Captain Henry Cole and countless others who died buying time for the quantum bomb to be developed. Campbell sent a transmission to every screen and every display, and every communication device in human space, and told everyone that the Zarkonian fleet had been destroyed, and the immediate threat to their survival had ended. But they must not forget the price paid for this victory. She said the names of Captain Daniel Brooks and the crew of the USS Vengeance, and Captain Victoria Grant and the Second Fleet, and Governor Stephen Martinez, and Captain Henry Cole, and the millions of civilians who died on Tau Ceti and Proxima Centauri, because they gave everything so humanity could survive. She said the Zarkonians thought they could exterminate humanity, and they destroyed the greatest battleship without mercy, and turned human worlds into wastelands, and believed humans would break. But they learned what every enemy of humanity eventually learns, which is that humans do not break and do not surrender, and do not forgive. Campbell said she was authorizing Research Station 7 to begin production of quantum resonance weapons, and they would hunt down every remaining Zarkonian vessel in known space and ensure they never threatened another species again, and they would reclaim lost colonies and rebuild what was destroyed, and remember those who died. This was humanity promise and humanity oath, because humans are survivors and builders, and when pushed to the brink, they are warriors beyond compare. 3 months later, the first quantum resonance torpedoes came off production lines, and 6 months after that, human ships began hunting the scattered remnants of the Zarkonian Empire and the war that had nearly ended. Humanity became a campaign against those who tried to destroy them. The ruins of Tau Ceti and Proxima Centauri remained as monuments to the fallen, and memorials were built on Earth, listing every name and every life lost, and in the halls of the rebuilt Unified Earth Command, a new motto was written above the entrance. They destroyed our battleship without mercy, and we rebuilt, and they turned our worlds into wastelands, and we returned because humanity endures, and humanity prevails, and humanity remembers. The universe learned a simple truth that humanity could be hurt, and humanity could be bloodied, but humanity could not be broken.